Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I was driving alone on a deserted highway. The only sounds the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of wind outside. The darkness pressed in on me, broken only by the dim glow of my headlights cutting through the night. That's when I noticed it, a car looming in my rearview mirror, tailgating me so close I could practically feel its breath on my bumper. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the road ahead, but the sense of unease gnawed at me like a worm in my gut. I sped up, hoping to put some distance between us. But the car stayed right on my tail, like a shadow that refused to be shaken off. Panic bubbled up inside me, clawing at my throat, as I realized that I was being followed. Then, without warning, the car behind me lurched forward, ramming into my back bumper with a force that sent my heart pounding in my chest. I swerved, struggling to maintain control of the wheel as my car skidded across the asphalt. Desperate now, I tried to shake off my pursuer, weaving in and out of lanes, taking sharp turns and sudden detours in a desperate bid for escape. But no matter what I did, the other car stayed hot on my heels, like a relentless predator stalking its prey. In a blind panic, I veered off the highway, onto a narrow, winding road that cut through the wilderness like a knife through butter. I prayed that I would lose them in the darkness, that they would give up the chase and leave me alone. But they didn't. They followed me off the main road, their headlights glaring in my rearview mirror like the eyes of a hungry beast. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, they struck again, ramming into my car with a sickening crunch of metal on metal. My car careened off the road, crashing through the underbrush and coming to a jarring halt in a small clearing deep in the woods. My head spun, my vision swimming with stars as I struggled to make sense of what had just happened. But there was no time to dwell on it. I could hear footsteps approaching outside, heavy and deliberate, like the footsteps of a predator closing in for the kill. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before it was too late. Summoning every ounce of strength and courage I had left, I forced open the door and stumbled out into the night, my legs wobbly beneath me, my heart hammering in my chest. I didn't stop to look back, didn't dare to. I just ran, as fast and as far as my legs would carry me, until I couldn't run anymore. Hours passed, or maybe just minutes, I couldn't be sure. Time seemed to blur together in a haze of fear and adrenaline as I stumbled through the darkness, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my body screaming in pain. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. I knew that if I stopped, even for a moment, they would catch me, and I would never make it out alive. So I kept going, fueled by sheer determination and the desperate need to survive. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw it, the lights of a small town twinkling in the distance, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With renewed strength, I pushed myself forward, stumbling into the safety of civilization at last. The authorities were called, and I told them everything, about the car that had been following me, about the terrifying ordeal I had endured. They promised to do everything in their power to catch whoever was responsible and bring them to justice. But even now, as I sit here, safe and sound, surrounded by the familiar comforts of home, I can't shake the feeling that they're still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for their next victim. And I can only pray that no one else falls prey to their twisted game of cat and mouse. My gas gauge hovered dangerously close to empty, so I pulled into a remote gas station that seemed to materialize out of the darkness. As I stepped out of my car, the chill of the night air sent shivers down my spine. The station was eerily quiet, with no signs of life except for a faint glow emanating from the storefront. I made my way toward the building, my footsteps echoing in the silence like a drumbeat. When I pushed open the door and stepped inside, I was greeted by a scene straight out of a nightmare. The attendant behind the counter was hunched over, muttering to himself incoherently, his eyes darting back and forth like a cornered animal. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end as a wave of unease washed over me. I approached the counter cautiously, trying to keep my voice steady as I asked for a fill-up. But the attendant's response was anything but reassuring. He just continued to mutter and mumble, his movements jerky and erratic, like a puppet on strings. That's when I noticed it, the faint smell of something foul lingering in the air, like rotting meat left out in the sun. My stomach churned in revulsion as I realized that something was seriously wrong here, that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. I glanced around the store, searching for any sign of help or escape, but there was none to be found. The walls seemed to press in around me, trapping me in this nightmare with no way out. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before it was too late. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I turned to leave, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. But as I reached for the door, a voice called out from behind me, freezing me in place like a deer caught in headlights. I turned slowly, my blood running cold as I saw the look of malice in the attendant's eyes, the twisted grin spreading across his face like a spider weaving its web. In that moment, I knew I was in grave danger, that I had stumbled upon something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. With a surge of adrenaline, I bolted for the door, throwing it open and sprinting into the night with all the speed I could muster. I could hear the sound of footsteps echoing behind me, getting closer and closer with each passing moment. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran faster and faster, my lungs burning, my legs screaming in protest, until I couldn't run anymore. And then, just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw it, the lights of a passing car, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With a desperate cry for help, I stumbled onto the road, waving my arms frantically as the car screeched to a halt beside me. I didn't wait for it to come to a complete stop. I threw open the door and practically dove inside, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I told the driver everything, about the gas station, about the attendant, about the danger I had narrowly escaped. They listened in horrified silence, their eyes wide with fear and disbelief. We drove to the nearest police station, where I recounted my story to the authorities, every word dripping with urgency and desperation. They promised to investigate, to get to the bottom of what had happened and bring those responsible to justice. I was driving home from campus late one evening, eager to get back to my dorm and unwind after a long day of classes. The quickest route was through a wooded area, a shortcut I often took to save time. But little did I know, that decision would lead me straight into a nightmare. As I drove deeper into the forest, the trees closed in around me, casting eerie shadows across the road. I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket, but I pushed it aside, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But then, up ahead, I saw them, a group of figures standing in the middle of the road, their faces obscured by dark masks. My heart leaped into my throat as I slammed on the brakes, bringing my car to a screeching halt just a few feet away from the menacing figures. I sat frozen in my seat, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I stared at the masked individuals blocking my path. I could feel their eyes on me, boring into my soul with a chilling intensity that sent shivers down my spine. For a moment, we just stared at each other, locked in a tense standoff as the silence stretched on. And then, without warning, one of the figures stepped forward, a glint of menace in their eyes as they approached my car. I knew I had to get out of there, to escape before things took a turn for the worse. With trembling hands, I fumbled for the keys in the ignition, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed for the engine to turn over. But as I tried to start the car, I realized with horror that it wouldn't budge. Panic surged through me as I frantically pumped the gas pedal, willing the engine to come to life, but it was no use. My car was dead, a useless hunk of metal in the face of danger. I was trapped, at the mercy of the masked figures who now surrounded my car, their presence looming over me like a dark cloud. I could hear them whispering to each other in hushed tones, their voices low and menacing as they discussed their next move. I knew I had to think fast, to come up with a plan to escape before it was too late. With shaking hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling with the buttons as I tried to dial for help. But as I glanced down at the screen, I realized with a sinking feeling that there was no signal. We were too far off the beaten path, too deep in the heart of the forest for my phone to reach anyone. Desperation clawed at me as I searched for a way out, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. And then, suddenly, a voice broke through the silence, cutting through the darkness like a knife. It was one of the masked figures, their voice low and gravelly as they spoke to me through the closed window of my car. They demanded that I hand over my belongings, threatening me with violence if I refused. I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through me as I realized the gravity of the situation. These people weren't just here to scare me, they were dangerous, and they meant business. But even as fear threatened to overwhelm me, a steely resolve settled over me like a protective shield. I may have been trapped, but I refused to go down without a fight. With trembling hands, I reached for my bag, fumbling for my wallet and phone as I prepared to comply with their demands. But even as I handed over my belongings, I knew that this was far from over. As the masked figures disappeared into the darkness, leaving me alone in the silence of the forest, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle over me like a heavy weight. I knew that I had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter, but the memory of that night would haunt me for years to come. But despite the fear and uncertainty that lingered in the air, I was grateful to be alive. And as I drove away from that dark forest, I made a promise to myself: I would never take shortcuts again, no matter how tempting they may seem. It was late at night, and my girlfriend and I were driving on our way home. As we rounded a bend in the road, our headlights illuminated a scene that sent a chill down my spine, a makeshift roadblock manned by a group of men, their faces obscured by dark masks. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowed the car to a stop, my mind racing with fear and uncertainty. I could feel my girlfriend's hand trembling in mine as we stared at the masked figures blocking our path. We were completely at their mercy, at the mercy of a group of strangers whose intentions were unknown to us. For a moment, there was silence, broken only by the sound of our breath coming in shallow gasps. And then, one of the masked men stepped forward, his voice low and menacing as he spoke to us through the closed window of our car. He demanded that we hand over our belongings, threatening us with violence if we refused. My mind raced as I tried to think of a way out of the situation, but it was no use. We were trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help us. With trembling hands, I reached for my wallet and phone, handing them over to the masked men as my girlfriend watched in silence beside me. I could feel the weight of their gaze bearing down on us, their eyes boring into our souls with a chilling intensity that sent shivers down my spine. As the masked men disappeared into the darkness, leaving us alone on the deserted highway, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief wash over me. We had narrowly escaped a terrifying encounter, but the memory of that night would haunt me for years to come. It was one of those stormy nights where the rain pounded relentlessly against the windshield, making it hard to see anything beyond a few feet ahead. I was on a rural delivery route, trying to navigate my way through winding back roads that seemed to stretch on forever. As the storm intensified, I realized that I had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way. Panic began to rise within me as I struggled to find my bearings in the darkness. With each passing minute, the road seemed to grow more desolate, with no signs of civilization in sight. Feeling a sense of urgency, I decided to pull over and ask for directions from the next person I saw. Just as I was about to give up hope, I spotted a figure up ahead, huddled under the shelter of a dilapidated bus stop. Relief flooded through me as I approached the stranger, eager for any assistance they could offer. But as I got closer, a feeling of unease began to gnaw at the pit of my stomach. There was something off about the person standing before me, something that sent shivers down my spine. Nevertheless, I pushed aside my instincts and greeted them with a friendly smile, explaining my predicament and asking for directions back to the main road. To my surprise, the person responded with a smile of their own, offering to help me find my way. Grateful for their kindness, I followed their directions without question, eager to escape the isolation of the back roads and return to the safety of civilization. But as we drove deeper into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The roads grew narrower and more treacherous, with towering trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. I began to suspect that the person beside me wasn't leading me back to safety at all, but further into the heart of darkness. Suddenly, my worst fears were realized as the person directed me down a secluded dirt path, far removed from any semblance of civilization. Alarm bells rang in my mind as I realized that I had fallen into a trap, lured away from safety by someone with sinister intentions. With adrenaline coursing through my veins, I slammed on the brakes and demanded answers from the person beside me. But instead of responding, they simply smiled, their eyes glinting with malice as they reached for something hidden beneath their jacket. Terrified for my life, I knew that I had to act fast if I wanted to escape. With a surge of determination, I flung open the car door and bolted into the darkness, the sound of my pounding footsteps drowned out by the roar of the storm. Branches whipped in my face as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I struggled to put as much distance between myself and my would-be assailant as possible. I didn't stop running until I was sure that I was safe, far away from the danger that lurked in the shadows. Exhausted and trembling, I collapsed onto the ground, the rain soaking through my clothes as I tried to catch my breath. But even as I lay there, gasping for air, I knew that I had narrowly escaped a fate worse than death. As the storm raged on overhead, I vowed to never again trust a stranger in the darkness, to always listen to my instincts and never let fear cloud my judgment. And as I finally made my way back to the main road, I couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been so lucky. I was driving home from my night shift at the hospital, exhausted and eager to crawl into bed and finally get some rest. The road stretched out before me, deserted and silent in the dead of night. As I rounded a bend, I saw her, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, her silhouette illuminated by the glow of the streetlights. At first, I thought she might need help, so I slowed down and rolled down my window to offer assistance. But as I drew closer, I felt a chill run down my spine. There was something off about her, something unsettling that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Still, I couldn't just leave her there alone in the dark, so I pulled over and stepped out of my car, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum. She turned to face me, and I could see the desperation in her eyes, the fear etched into her features. Before I could say a word, she spoke, her voice trembling with emotion. She told me she had been kidnapped, that she had managed to escape her captor but didn't know where to go or what to do next. My blood ran cold at her words, and I felt a surge of panic rising within me. I knew I had to help her, to get her to safety as quickly as possible. But as I reached out to take her hand, she recoiled, her eyes widening with fear. And that's when I realized she wasn't alone out here in the darkness. I spun around just in time to see him, a man emerging from the shadows, his face twisted into a sinister grin. He moved toward us with purpose, his steps slow and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. With a sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, I realized that I had walked right into a trap, that this woman was no victim but a willing accomplice to her captor. And now, I was caught in their twisted game of cat and mouse. I turned to run, but it was too late. They were upon me, their hands grabbing at me from all sides, pulling me down into the darkness. I fought back with all the strength I had, kicking and screaming as I struggled to break free from their grasp. But they were too strong, too determined to let me escape. They dragged me into their car, throwing me into the back seat like a sack of potatoes. I could hear them laughing as they sped off into the night, leaving me trapped and helpless in their clutches. For hours, we drove through the darkness, the road stretching out before us like an endless abyss. I didn't know where they were taking me or what they planned to do with me, but I knew one thing for certain: I had to find a way to escape before it was too late. With every passing mile, the fear gnawed at me like a ravenous beast, tearing away at my sanity until there was nothing left but raw, primal terror. I prayed for a miracle, for some stroke of luck that would set me free from this nightmare once and for all. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, the faint glow of streetlights up ahead, like a beacon of hope in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the car door and leaped out onto the road, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, the sound of their laughter echoing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the pavement in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward inch by agonizing inch until finally, mercifully, I saw the lights of a passing car up ahead. With a desperate cry for help, I waved my arms frantically until they screeched to a halt beside me. I told them everything, about the woman, about the man, about the nightmare I had endured. They listened in horrified silence, their eyes wide with disbelief. And then, without a word, they drove me to the nearest police station, where I recounted my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find those responsible and bring them to justice. And though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time in what felt like an eternity. As I sit here now, safe and sound in the comfort of my own home, I can't help but wonder, what if I hadn't stopped to help that woman on the side of the road? What if I had just kept driving, oblivious to the danger lurking in the darkness? But then again, perhaps it was fate that brought us together, that led me to that fateful encounter on that desolate stretch of highway. Perhaps, in the end, it was all just part of a larger plan, a test of strength and resilience that would ultimately lead me back to safety and sanity once more. I was driving down a lonely stretch of highway, the monotony of the road stretching out before me like an endless ribbon of asphalt. It was late, and I was tired, the only company the hum of my engine and the occasional flicker of the streetlights overhead. As I rounded a bend, I saw him, a lone figure standing by the side of the road, his thumb outstretched in the universal gesture of a hitchhiker. I hesitated for a moment, my instincts warring within me, but in the end, my loneliness won out, and I pulled over to offer him a ride. He climbed into the cab beside me, offering me a grateful smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was something off about him, something that set my nerves on edge, but I pushed aside my misgivings and focused on the road ahead. As we drove, we exchanged small talk, the conversation awkward and stilted. I tried to ignore the feeling of unease that settled over me like a heavy blanket, but it lingered, refusing to be ignored. And then, just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, he spoke, a simple question, innocuous enough on the surface, but filled with an undercurrent of menace that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew then that something was wrong, that this man was not who he claimed to be. But before I could react, he reached out and grabbed the steering wheel, his grip like a vice as he forced the truck off the road and into the darkness beyond. I fought back with all the strength I had, wrestling with him for control of the vehicle as it careened off the highway and into the wilderness beyond. But he was too strong, too determined to let me escape. We crashed through the underbrush, the branches scraping against the sides of the truck like claws as we plunged deeper and deeper into the darkness. I could hear him laughing beside me, his laughter echoing through the night like a sinister refrain. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light up ahead, like a beacon in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and leaped out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, the sound of his laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward inch by agonizing inch until finally, mercifully, I reached the safety of the road once more. I flagged down the first passing car I saw, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I begged them for help. They listened in horror as I recounted my ordeal, their eyes wide with disbelief. They drove me to the nearest police station, where I told my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find the man who had attacked me and bring him to justice. And though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since that fateful encounter on the highway. As I sit here now, safe and sound in the comfort of my own home, I can't help but wonder, what if I had never stopped to pick up that hitchhiker? What if I had just kept driving, oblivious to the danger lurking in the darkness? But then again, perhaps it was fate that brought us together, that led me to that fateful encounter on that deserted stretch of highway. It was a rainy night, the kind where the sound of the rain hitting the windshield drowned out everything else. I was driving, navigating the slick roads with caution, when I got a notification on my phone, a new ride request. I pulled over to the curb and waited, my windshield wipers swishing back and forth as I scanned the street for any sign of my passenger. And then, out of the darkness, I saw him, a man standing on the corner, his hood pulled up against the rain. He climbed into the back seat without a word, his movements smooth and practiced. I greeted him with a polite smile, but he didn't return it, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. We drove in silence for a while, the only sound the steady rhythm of the rain on the roof of the car. But as we neared his destination, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him fidgeting in his seat, his hands clenched into fists in his lap. I asked him if everything was okay, but he just nodded curtly and looked away. As we pulled up to his destination, he suddenly asked me to keep driving, his voice low and urgent. I hesitated, unsure of what to do, but before I could respond, he reached forward and grabbed the steering wheel, his grip like iron. I tried to wrestle control back from him, but he was too strong, his hands like vice grips as he forced the car off the road and into the darkness beyond. I shouted for help, but the rain drowned out my cries, the sound of the storm swallowing them whole. I struggled against him, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer as we careened off the road and into the wilderness beyond. And then, just when I thought all hope was lost, I saw it, a glimmer of light up ahead, like a beacon in the darkness. With a surge of adrenaline, I threw open the door and leaped out into the night, my heart pounding in my chest like a jackhammer. I ran as fast as my legs would carry me, the sound of his laughter ringing in my ears like a taunt. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I ran until I thought my lungs would burst, until I collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion and despair. But even then, I didn't give up. I crawled, I stumbled, I dragged myself forward inch by agonizing inch until finally, mercifully, I reached the safety of the road once more. I flagged down the first passing car I saw, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I begged them for help. They listened in horror as I recounted my ordeal, their eyes wide with disbelief. They drove me to the nearest police station, where I told my story to the authorities in painstaking detail. They promised to do everything in their power to find the man who had attacked me and bring him to justice. And though I knew it would be a long and difficult road ahead, I felt a glimmer of hope for the first time since that fateful encounter on that rainy night. I was on assignment, driving down a desolate stretch of road to reach a remote location for an interview. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape as I pressed on, eager to reach my destination before nightfall. As I rounded a bend in the road, I came upon a scene that sent a chill down my spine. There, in the middle of nowhere, was a car accident. The mangled wreckage lay strewn across the road, and it was clear that this was no ordinary crash. Instinct kicked in, and I pulled over to offer assistance. But as I approached the wreckage, a sense of unease washed over me. Something about the scene felt off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled into something far more sinister than a simple accident. As I peered through the broken windows of the wrecked car, my worst fears were confirmed. This was no accident at all. It was a carefully orchestrated event designed to look like one. Heart pounding, I knew I had to get out of there and fast. But as I turned to leave, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I whirled around to find myself face to face with a group of men, their expressions dark and menacing. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was in grave danger. These men were not here to help. They were here to silence anyone who stumbled upon their secret. With no time to waste, I turned and ran, my heart pounding in my chest as I sprinted back to my car. The sound of their footsteps echoed in my ears as I fumbled with the keys, desperately trying to start the engine. Finally, the car roared to life, and I peeled out of there, leaving the scene of the accident far behind me. But even as I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that clung to me like a shadow. As I reached the nearest town, I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just ignore what I had seen. So I contacted the authorities and told them everything, from the car accident to the sinister men who had tried to silence me. It wasn't long before the truth began to emerge. The so-called accident was just the tip of the iceberg, part of a larger conspiracy that reached far deeper than anyone could have imagined. In the end, justice was served, and those responsible for the crash were brought to justice. But the experience left its mark on me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurks beneath the surface of the world we live in. As I reflect on that fateful day, I can't help but feel grateful to have escaped with my life. But I also know that I'll never forget the terror of staring into the face of evil and living to tell the tale. Alright, so I gotta tell you about this messed up thing that happened to me. I was just minding my own business, doing my usual thing as a mechanic, when I got this distress call from some stranded person on this remote road. Now, normally I wouldn't bother with stuff like that, but it was late, and I guess I felt bad for whoever it was. So, I hop in my truck and head out to find this person. The road was deserted, and the whole scene had this eerie vibe to it, like something straight out of a horror movie. But I shrugged it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. Anyway, after what felt like forever, I finally spot the car up ahead. It was just sitting there on the side of the road, all alone in the darkness. I pull up behind it, expecting to see someone waving for help or whatever, but there's nobody there. No sign of the driver anywhere. Now, at this point, I'm starting to get a little freaked out. I mean, where the hell did this person go? So, I decide to take a closer look around the car, see if I can find any clues or something. And that's when things start to get really messed up. I notice these weird marks on the ground, like someone had been dragged away from the car. My heart starts racing as I follow the trail, my mind racing with all sorts of crazy thoughts. I eventually come to this clearing in the woods, and that's when I see it. There's this old, rundown shack sitting there in the middle of nowhere, and it looks like something straight out of a horror movie. I swear, I could feel my blood run cold as I slowly approached the place. But I had to know what was going on, so I muster up all the courage I have and go inside. And let me tell you, what I found in there was straight up nightmare fuel. The walls were covered in all sorts of messed up stuff, like creepy drawings and symbols that I couldn't even begin to understand. And then I see it. There's this makeshift altar in the center of the room, surrounded by candles and other weird crap. At this point, I'm freaking out. I know I need to get out of there, but it's like I'm frozen in place, unable to move. And that's when I hear it, this low, guttural growling coming from somewhere in the darkness. I don't waste any time. I turn and bolt out of there as fast as I can, my heart pounding in my chest the whole time. I don't stop running until I'm back at my truck, and even then, I don't feel safe. I peel out of there as fast as my truck will go, not stopping until I'm miles away from that godforsaken place. It took me a while to calm down after that, and even now, I still can't shake the feeling that something truly evil was lurking out there in those woods. So yeah, that's my story. Take it for what it's worth, but just know that if you ever find yourself on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere, you better think twice before stopping to help someone out. You never know what kind of nightmare you might stumble into. The road stretched out before me, winding its way through the rugged mountains like a ribbon of asphalt. I had chosen this scenic route to break up the monotony of my journey, but now, as I navigated the twisting turns and steep inclines, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the landscape and plunging the mountains into darkness. I pressed on, my headlights cutting through the gloom as I searched for any sign of civilization. But as the minutes turned into hours, I realized that I was hopelessly lost. The winding road seemed to stretch on endlessly, leading me deeper and deeper into the heart of the mountains with no end in sight. Just when I was beginning to lose hope, I spotted a flicker of light in the distance. My heart leaped with excitement as I steered the car toward the source of illumination, praying that it would lead me to safety. As I drew closer, the outline of a cabin came into view, nestled among the trees like a beacon of hope in the darkness. Relief flooded through me as I pulled up outside the cabin, eager to seek shelter from the cold mountain night. But as I approached the door, a sense of foreboding washed over me. There was something not quite right about this place, something that sent shivers down my spine and made my skin crawl. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the doorknob, before finally summoning the courage to push it open and step inside. The interior of the cabin was dimly lit, casting long shadows that danced across the walls like specters in the night. As I ventured further into the cabin, I became aware of a strange smell hanging in the air, a sickly sweet odor that made my stomach churn with nausea. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to block out the scent as I searched for any sign of life. And then, I saw him, a figure lurking in the shadows, his features obscured by darkness as he watched me with eyes that glinted like shards of ice. Fear gripped me like a vice as I realized that I was not alone in the cabin, that there was someone, or something, else lurking in the darkness with me. I turned to flee, but before I could reach the door, the figure stepped forward, blocking my path with a menacing grin. My heart hammered in my chest as I backed away, searching desperately for a way out of the cabin and away from the sinister stranger who threatened my safety. But no matter which way I turned, he was there, his presence looming over me like a dark shadow that refused to be shaken. Panic bubbled up inside me as I realized that I was trapped, with nowhere to run and no one to help me. I could feel the stranger's eyes boring into me, his gaze filled with a malevolent intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. I knew then that I was in grave danger, that if I didn't find a way to escape soon, it would be too late. With trembling hands, I reached for the nearest object, a heavy lamp that sat on a nearby table, and swung it at the stranger with all the force I could muster. The blow connected with a sickening thud, and the figure staggered backward, stunned by the sudden attack. Seizing my chance, I bolted for the door, throwing it open and sprinting out into the night. I could hear the stranger's footsteps echoing behind me as I fled into the darkness, my heart pounding in my chest with every step. But I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car, where I collapsed into the driver's seat and locked the doors behind me. I sat there for what felt like hours, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I tried to process what had just happened. Eventually, I mustered the courage to start the car and drive away from the cabin, leaving behind the darkness and the terror that lurked within. And as I left the mountains behind me and continued on my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped a fate far worse than death. It was just another night on patrol, the streets quiet and deserted as I cruised along in my squad car. The radio crackled to life, dispatch alerting me to a suspicious vehicle parked on the side of the road. I made my way to the location, my senses on high alert as I approached the vehicle. It was an old sedan, its windows tinted darkly, blending into the shadows of the night. I cautiously approached the car, my hand resting on the grip of my gun as I peered through the window. What I saw inside sent a chill down my spine, a woman, her eyes wide with fear, cowering in the trunk. I wasted no time in forcing the trunk open, the hinges squealing in protest as I reached inside to help her out. She was trembling, her hands shaking as she clung to me, her breath coming in ragged gasps. I radioed for backup, my voice tight with urgency as I relayed the situation to dispatch. They responded quickly, sirens wailing in the distance as backup units raced to our location. As we waited for backup to arrive, I tried to calm the woman down, reassuring her that she was safe now. But her eyes were haunted, her gaze darting nervously around the darkened street as if expecting her captors to appear at any moment. When backup finally arrived, I briefed them on the situation, my heart pounding in my chest as we formulated a plan to apprehend the kidnappers. We spread out, combing the area for any sign of the perpetrators, our flashlights cutting through the darkness like beacons of hope. But as we searched, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that our every move was being monitored by unseen eyes. I gripped my gun tighter, my senses on high alert as we pressed on, determined to bring the kidnappers to justice. And then, just when we least expected it, they struck, emerging from the shadows like ghosts, their faces twisted with malice as they lunged at us with weapons drawn. It was chaos, a whirlwind of gunfire and shouting as we fought for our lives, our training kicking in as we exchanged fire with the kidnappers. But even as we held our ground, I knew that we were outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. I made a split-second decision, shouting for my fellow officers to fall back as I covered their retreat. I laid down suppressing fire, my heart pounding in my chest as I tried to buy them precious seconds to escape. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, backup arrived, a flood of flashing lights and sirens as reinforcements poured in from all directions. Together, we overwhelmed the kidnappers, taking them into custody one by one as the adrenaline of the battle slowly began to fade. As I stood there, surrounded by my fellow officers, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in our teamwork, our bravery, and our unwavering determination to protect the innocent. And as for the woman we rescued, she was safe now, her nightmare finally over thanks to our quick thinking and decisive action. She thanked us profusely, her eyes shining with gratitude as she embraced each and every one of us in turn. As I drove home that night, the events of the evening replaying in my mind like a scene from a movie, I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction in knowing that I had made a difference, that I had helped to bring a dangerous criminal to justice and saved a life in the process. So, I gotta share this crazy thing that happened to me. I work as a social worker, and one day, I had to drive out to this remote farmhouse to check on a family in trouble. Seemed routine enough, you know? Anyway, I hop in my car and head out there. The drive was long, and the farmhouse was out in the middle of nowhere. I remember feeling kinda uneasy as I got closer, like something just wasn't right. When I finally pull up to the house, though, my heart drops. It's quiet, too quiet. And there are signs of a struggle everywhere, broken furniture, stuff knocked over, you name it. I start to get this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach, like I've stumbled into something way worse than I bargained for. But I push those thoughts aside and try to focus on what I need to do. I get out of my car and cautiously approach the house. The door's wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. I call out, but there's no response, just silence. I step inside, and that's when things start to get really messed up. The place is a wreck, like a tornado came through or something. And there's blood, lots of it, splattered all over the walls and floor. My heart's racing now, and I can feel the panic rising in my chest. I know I should call the cops, but something's holding me back. Maybe it's the fear of what I might find, or maybe it's just shock. I start to search the house, calling out for anyone who might still be there. But there's nobody, just me and the eerie silence. Then, out of nowhere, I hear this faint sound coming from upstairs, like someone crying. My blood runs cold as I slowly make my way up the stairs, my heart pounding in my ears. I reach the top and follow the sound to one of the bedrooms. And that's when I see her, a young girl, huddled in the corner, tears streaming down her face. I rush over to her, asking if she's okay, but she's too scared to even speak. I try to comfort her as best I can, promising that everything's going to be all right. But deep down, I know it's not. I can feel it in my bones. Whatever happened here, it's not over yet. I scoop the girl up in my arms and make a run for it, not stopping until we're far away from that godforsaken place. I call the cops and tell them everything, praying that they'll be able to make sense of the nightmare I just stumbled into. They arrive soon after, and I hand the girl over to them, feeling like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. But as I watch them drive away, I can't shake the feeling that this is far from over. I may have escaped with my life, but the horrors of that farmhouse will haunt me forever. And I can only hope that whoever did this pays for their crimes, so that no one else has to suffer the way that poor family did. I was driving down a deserted country road, the sun setting behind me, casting long shadows across the empty fields. I had taken a wrong turn somewhere along the way, and now I found myself miles from civilization with no cell service and no idea where I was. I cursed under my breath, glancing down at the fuel gauge as I realized I was running low on gas. I needed to find help, and fast, before I found myself stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for assistance. I pressed on, my eyes scanning the horizon for any sign of life. And then, just when I was beginning to lose hope, I saw it, a small cluster of buildings in the distance, smoke rising from the chimneys as if beckoning me closer. Relief flooded through me as I steered the car towards the buildings, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed that whoever lived there would be able to help me. But as I drew closer, a sense of unease began to creep over me, a feeling that something wasn't quite right about this place. I parked the car and stepped out onto the gravel road, my footsteps echoing loudly in the stillness of the evening. I approached the nearest building, a rundown farmhouse with peeling paint and boarded-up windows, and knocked on the door, my heart racing as I waited for someone to answer. But no one came. I knocked again, louder this time, but still there was no response. I tried the door handle, but it was locked tight, as if whoever lived here didn't want any visitors. I turned away from the farmhouse, my stomach churning with unease as I made my way towards the next building. It was a barn, its doors hanging open on rusty hinges, and as I peered inside, I saw something that made my blood run cold, rows of cages, each one filled with animals, their eyes wide with fear as they huddled together in the dim light. I stumbled backwards, my mind reeling with horror as I realized what I had stumbled upon, a makeshift animal shelter, run by someone who had no regard for the welfare of the creatures in their care. I turned to flee, my heart pounding in my chest as I raced back to my car, but before I could reach it, I heard the sound of footsteps behind me, heavy and deliberate, like the approach of a predator stalking its prey. I whirled around, my eyes widening in terror as I saw them, a group of men, their faces hidden in the shadows, their eyes gleaming with malice as they advanced towards me. I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched desperately for a way out, but there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. I was trapped, at the mercy of these hostile strangers who seemed intent on doing me harm. I tried to reason with them, to plead for mercy, but they only laughed, their voices harsh and mocking as they closed in around me. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I heard the sound of approaching sirens, the flashing lights of a police car illuminating the darkness as backup arrived to rescue me from my ordeal. The men scattered, disappearing into the night like phantoms as the police officers swarmed around me, their voices urgent as they checked to make sure I was unharmed. I was shaken, but alive, and as I watched the men being taken into custody, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief that I had escaped with my life, and that justice would be served for those who had tried to harm me. As I drove away from that desolate stretch of road, the lights of the police car fading into the distance behind me, I couldn't help but wonder what other horrors lurked in the darkness of the night, waiting to ensnare unwary travelers like myself. But one thing was for certain, I would never forget the terror of that fateful encounter, and the narrow escape that had saved my life. I was driving home from visiting family, my daughter sound asleep in the back seat, when it happened. My car sputtered and jerked before finally coming to a complete stop on the deserted road. Panic surged through me as I realized that I was stranded in the middle of the woods with no cell service and no one around for miles. I tried to remain calm as I popped the hood and attempted to diagnose the problem, but my efforts were futile. It was clear that I wasn't going to be able to fix the car myself, and with the sun sinking lower in the sky, I knew I needed to find help, and fast. Leaving my daughter safely buckled in her car seat, I set out on foot, hoping to find a house or a business where I could use a phone to call for assistance. But as I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Strange noises echoed through the trees, the rustling of leaves and the snap of twigs underfoot. Every shadow seemed to conceal some unseen threat, and I found myself glancing nervously over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the darkness. The woods felt alive with malevolent energy, and with each passing minute, my fear grew stronger. I quickened my pace, desperate to find help before whatever was out there found me. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon a small cabin nestled among the trees. Relief flooded through me as I approached the door, my heart pounding in my chest. I knocked hesitantly, half expecting the door to swing open to reveal some horror lurking within. But to my surprise, a kindly-looking man answered, his expression one of concern as he took in my bedraggled appearance. I quickly explained my situation, and the man, whose name was John, offered to help. He invited me inside, where I was greeted by the warm glow of a fire crackling in the hearth. As John went to fetch his phone, I sank into a chair, my nerves still on edge. Despite the comfort of the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me like a shroud. Minutes turned into hours as we waited for help to arrive, and with each passing moment, my fear grew stronger. What if whatever was out there found us before help came? My mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. But before I could succumb to panic, the sound of an approaching engine broke through the silence. Relief flooded through me as I realized that help had finally arrived. I thanked John profusely for his kindness and rushed outside to meet the tow truck that had come to rescue us. As the driver worked to hook up my car, I couldn't help but glance nervously into the surrounding woods, half expecting to see some sinister figure lurking in the shadows. But there was nothing there, just the rustle of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. And as we drove away from the cabin, leaving the woods behind us, I couldn't help but feel grateful to be alive. The whole experience had been terrifying, but it had also reminded me of the kindness of strangers and the importance of staying calm in the face of danger. As we pulled onto the highway, I glanced one last time into the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following us. But the road stretched out behind us, empty and devoid of any threat. With a sigh of relief, I turned my gaze forward, focusing on the road ahead. And as the lights of the city loomed in the distance, I knew that I was finally safe, at least for now. The landscape stretched out before me, barren and desolate, with nothing but sand and scrub as far as the eye could see. I was on a road trip, exploring the vast expanse of the desert in search of adventure and new experiences. But as I drove deeper into the wilderness, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that gnawed at the pit of my stomach. And then, just when I least expected it, disaster struck. My car sputtered and died, the engine coughing its last breath as I coasted to a stop on the side of the road. I cursed under my breath as I realized what had happened. I had run out of gas, stranded in the middle of nowhere with no way to call for help. Panic surged through me as I looked around, the empty desert stretching out in all directions with no sign of civilization in sight. I checked my phone, praying for a signal, but it was no use. There was nothing but silence, the screen mocking me with its blankness. I knew I had to do something, and fast, before the unforgiving desert sun took its toll. I grabbed a water bottle from the back seat and set off on foot, hoping to find help or civilization before it was too late. The heat was oppressive, the sun beating down on me with relentless intensity as I trudged through the sand, each step feeling like a struggle against the elements. Hours passed, and still I saw no sign of help. My water was running low, and my throat felt like sandpaper as I stumbled on, the relentless sun beating down on me without mercy. And then, just when I was beginning to lose hope, I saw it, a glimmer of light on the horizon, the promise of salvation in the distance. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest as I drew closer, the light growing brighter with each step. And then, finally, I reached it, a small gas station, nestled in the heart of the desert like an oasis in the sand. Relief flooded through me as I staggered inside, my legs trembling with exhaustion as I collapsed onto the cool tile floor. The attendant looked up in surprise as I stumbled in, his eyes widening in concern as he took in my disheveled appearance. I tried to speak, to ask for help, but my throat was too parched to form words. I reached out for a bottle of water, my hands shaking as I twisted off the cap and drank greedily, the cool liquid soothing my dry throat as it slid down my parched throat. The attendant watched me with a mixture of sympathy and concern, his eyes filled with compassion as he offered me a hand up. I thanked him profusely, my voice hoarse with gratitude as I explained what had happened. He listened patiently, nodding in understanding as he offered to call for help on my behalf. I gratefully accepted, collapsing onto a nearby chair as I waited for assistance to arrive. And then, finally, after what felt like an eternity, I heard the sound of approaching sirens, the flashing lights of a rescue vehicle illuminating the darkness as help arrived at last. I was saved, my ordeal at an end as the paramedics tended to my needs and ensured that I was safe and sound. As I climbed into the back of the ambulance, I couldn't help but reflect on the terrifying experience I had just endured. The desert could be a harsh and unforgiving place, a vast and lonely wilderness where danger lurked around every corner. But I had survived, against all odds, and for that, I was grateful. I would never forget the terror of that fateful day, the fear and desperation that had gripped me as I struggled to find my way to safety. But I had made it out alive, and that was all that mattered. As the ambulance pulled away, carrying me to safety, I knew that I would never take the simple things in life for granted again. I was driving home from work late one night, eager to get back to the comfort of my own home after a long day. The streets were deserted, the city lights casting long shadows across the empty roads as I navigated my way through the urban jungle. I decided to take a shortcut through a neighborhood I wasn't familiar with, hoping to avoid the traffic that clogged the main thoroughfares at this time of night. But as I turned onto the dimly lit streets, a sense of unease crept over me, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I felt like I was being watched. I shook off the feeling and pressed on, determined to get home as quickly as possible. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw them, a group of shadowy figures lurking in the darkness, their eyes gleaming with malice as they watched me pass by. I felt a surge of fear course through me as I realized what was happening. I was being followed, hunted like prey by a pack of predators who saw me as an easy target. I hit the gas, my heart pounding in my chest as I sped down the deserted streets, the sound of their pursuit echoing in my ears like a nightmare come to life. They were gaining on me, their car roaring up behind me like a beast hungry for blood. I swerved around corners and down alleyways, trying to shake them off, but they were relentless, their headlights piercing the darkness as they closed in on me with each passing moment. I was running out of options, my mind racing as I tried to think of a way out of this nightmare. And then, just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it, a narrow alleyway, barely wide enough for my car to squeeze through. I didn't hesitate, didn't stop to think, I just slammed on the brakes and veered off the road, praying that I could outmaneuver them in the tight confines of the alley. The sound of screeching tires filled the air as I fishtailed through the narrow passage, the walls closing in around me like the jaws of a trap. But somehow, miraculously, I made it through, emerging onto the other side with my pursuers hot on my tail. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart sinking as I saw them closing in on me once again. But then, just when it seemed like all was lost, I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead, the beacon of safety I had been praying for. I hit the gas and raced towards them, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed that they would see me in time. And then, finally, mercifully, they did, the police car swerving into action and cutting off my pursuers just as they were about to overtake me. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands trembling on the wheel as I watched the drama unfold in the rearview mirror. The police officers leaped out of their car and moved in on the would-be carjackers, guns drawn and ready for action. I breathed a sigh of relief as I watched them apprehend my would-be attackers, my heart still racing with adrenaline as I realized just how close I had come to disaster. But I was safe now, thanks to the quick thinking of the police and a stroke of luck that had spared me from a fate worse than death. As I sat there in the darkness, waiting for the adrenaline to wear off and the reality of what had just happened to sink in, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the second chance I had been given. Alright, so I gotta share this wild ride I had as a rideshare driver. It was late, or should I say early, like the crack of dawn kinda early. Anyway, I get this request from some guy who wants to be dropped off in the middle of nowhere. Now, that's not exactly unusual for a rideshare, but something about this dude's vibe had me on edge from the get-go. So, I pick him up, and right away, I can tell there's something off about him. He's all jittery, constantly looking over his shoulder like he's expecting someone to jump out at any moment. I try to make small talk, to ease the tension, but he's not having it. Just gives me these short, clipped answers like he's got something to hide. We're driving for what feels like forever, and the whole time, I'm getting this sinking feeling in my gut. Like maybe I've stumbled into something I shouldn't have. Eventually, we reach this isolated spot in the middle of nowhere. No houses, no streetlights, just miles of empty road stretching out in every direction. I pull over, and that's when things start to get really freaky. The guy's acting all shady, like he's trying to hide something from me. He keeps glancing around nervously, like he's expecting trouble to come out of the shadows any second. I'm starting to regret ever picking this guy up, but I try to stay calm and professional. I ask him if he's sure he wants to be dropped off here, but he just nods, his eyes darting back and forth like he's trying to find an escape route. I let him out of the car, and as soon as he's gone, I peel out of there as fast as my wheels will take me. I don't stop until I'm miles away from that creepy spot, my heart pounding in my chest the whole time. I keep thinking about that guy and what he was up to. Was he involved in some shady business? Did he have enemies out to get him? Or was he just some paranoid nut job looking for trouble? I never found out the answers to those questions, and to be honest, I'm not sure I want to. All I know is, I dodged a bullet that night, and I'm damn grateful to be alive. It was a cold, dark night as I drove home from my late shift at work. The highway stretched out before me, empty and desolate, with only the occasional pair of headlights cutting through the darkness. But as I glanced in my rearview mirror, I noticed something unsettling, a car, lurking in the shadows behind me, its headlights glaring menacingly in my direction. At first, I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just another late-night commuter like myself. But as the miles ticked by and the car continued to follow me, I began to feel a growing sense of unease. I tried to lose them, weaving in and out of traffic and taking sudden turns down side streets in an attempt to shake off my pursuer. But no matter what I did, the car stayed right on my tail, like a shadow that refused to be shaken. Panic began to rise in my chest as I realized that I was being followed by someone with malicious intent. My mind raced with thoughts of what they might do to me if they caught up, rob me, assault me, or worse. I had to think fast, had to find a way to escape before it was too late. But with each passing minute, the car seemed to draw closer, its headlights casting an ominous glow in my rearview mirror. I knew I couldn't outrun them forever, couldn't keep playing this cat and mouse game on the empty highway. I needed help. Needed someone to come to my rescue before it was too late. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, my fingers fumbling over the screen as I tried to dial 911. But just as I was about to hit call, the car behind me suddenly surged forward, its headlights blinding me as it pulled alongside my own. I screamed as I caught a glimpse of the driver, a shadowy figure, their face obscured by the darkness of the car's interior. I could feel their eyes on me, cold and predatory, as they matched my speed and forced me off the road. I tried to fight back, to swerve away from them and escape their clutches, but it was no use. The car slammed into mine with a sickening crunch, sending me careening off the road and into the darkness beyond. I felt my heart pound in my chest as I struggled to regain control of my car, the sound of metal scraping against metal filling the air as I fought to keep from crashing. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, I saw it, the glow of streetlights up ahead, the promise of safety and salvation in the distance. With one final burst of adrenaline, I pushed down on the gas pedal and raced towards the lights, my heart pounding in my chest as I prayed that help would come in time. And then, just when it seemed like all was lost, I heard the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder and louder with each passing moment. I breathed a sigh of relief as I saw the flashing lights of a police car up ahead, the beacon of hope I had been praying for. With renewed determination, I pressed on towards them, my eyes fixed on the safety that lay just beyond my reach. And then, finally, mercifully, they were there, the police officers leaping out of their car and moving in on my attacker with guns drawn and ready for action. I watched in awe as they apprehended the driver, their swift and decisive action bringing an end to my terrifying ordeal. As I sat there in the darkness, shaking with fear and relief, I couldn't help but feel grateful for the second chance I had been given. I was cruising down the interstate, the only sound in the cab the low hum of the engine and the crackle of my CB radio. The night was dark, the road stretching out endlessly before me, illuminated only by the glow of my headlights. But then, out of nowhere, a crackling voice cut through the silence of the night, a distress signal from another driver, calling out for help on the radio. My heart began to race as I listened to the desperate plea, my instincts kicking in as I realized that someone out there was in trouble. Without hesitation, I steered my truck off the highway and onto the narrow shoulder, my headlights cutting through the darkness as I searched for the source of the distress signal. And then, up ahead, I saw it, another truck, parked haphazardly on the side of the road, its doors swinging open and its cargo scattered across the asphalt. My stomach churned as I pulled up alongside the abandoned vehicle, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I realized that something was very wrong. I climbed out of my truck and cautiously approached the abandoned vehicle, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for any sign of the driver. But as I peered inside the cab, I found it empty, no sign of the driver anywhere, just the eerie silence of the deserted highway stretching out before me. My mind raced with questions as I surveyed the scene. What had happened to the driver? And why had they called out for help on the radio? I searched the surrounding area, my eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of movement, but there was nothing, just the empty expanse of the highway stretching out before me. But then, just as I was about to give up hope, I saw it, a trail of blood, leading away from the abandoned truck and disappearing into the darkness beyond. My blood ran cold as I followed the trail, my heart pounding in my chest as I prepared myself for whatever horror lay ahead. And then, as I rounded a bend in the road, I saw it, a figure, slumped against the guardrail, their body battered and broken, their eyes staring lifelessly into the darkness. I rushed to their side, my hands shaking as I checked for signs of life, but it was no use. They were already gone, their life snuffed out by whatever horror had befallen them on this deserted stretch of highway. I cursed under my breath as I surveyed the scene, my mind racing with questions and fears. What had happened to this poor soul? And what was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting to strike? With a sinking feeling in my chest, I knew that I couldn't stay here, not with whatever horror had claimed this victim still out there, waiting in the darkness. I climbed back into my truck and slammed the door shut, my heart pounding in my chest as I fired up the engine and sped away from the scene, desperate to put as much distance between myself and whatever nightmare lay ahead. But even as I drove, my mind couldn't shake the image of that lifeless figure slumped against the guardrail, their eyes staring blankly into the darkness. The day started like any other. I was on my usual delivery route, driving through the countryside to drop off packages at various locations. Everything seemed normal as I approached the small rural town marked on my itinerary. As I entered the town limits, something felt off. The streets were deserted, and there was an eerie silence that hung in the air. But I shrugged it off, chalking it up to the town being quiet at this time of day. I navigated through the empty streets, following the directions on my GPS to the address where I needed to deliver the package. But as I drove deeper into the heart of the town, a sense of unease began to gnaw at me. There were no signs of life anywhere, no people milling about, no cars parked on the streets. It was as if the entire town had been abandoned. I pulled up in front of the address on my GPS, but when I looked out the window, I saw only an old, run-down building, its windows boarded up and its doors hanging off their hinges. Confused, I double-checked the address on the package, but it matched the one on my GPS exactly. I couldn't understand why I had been sent to deliver a package to such a derelict location. Despite my misgivings, I knew I had a job to do. I grabbed the package from the back of my delivery van and stepped out onto the empty street, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end as I approached the decrepit building. But as I reached out to knock on the door, a voice called out from behind me, causing me to jump in surprise. I spun around to see a man standing on the sidewalk, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that sent a shiver down my spine. He was tall and gaunt, with a weather-beaten face and a wild look in his eyes. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the rising sense of fear in my chest. The man didn't answer, but instead took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. Something about his demeanor sent alarm bells ringing in my head, and I took an instinctive step back, my heart pounding in my chest. Before I could react, the man lunged forward, his hands outstretched as if to grab me. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and falling to the ground with a thud. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet and raced back to my delivery van, the sound of my pounding footsteps echoing through the empty streets. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking with fear as I struggled to unlock the door and climb inside. But just as I managed to get the door closed and locked, I heard a loud bang from outside, the sound of someone pounding on the metal door. My heart raced as I started the engine and peeled out of the deserted town. The image of the man's wild eyes burned into my mind. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had stumbled onto something sinister, something that the town's residents would do anything to keep hidden. But one thing was for sure, I wouldn't be going back there anytime soon. It was a typical night shift for me, cruising the streets of the city in my taxi, picking up fares and ferrying them to their destinations. But one fare I picked up that night would change everything. The call came in around midnight, a request for a pickup at a dimly lit street corner on the outskirts of town. I didn't think much of it at the time. After all, late night pickups were par for the course in my line of work. As I pulled up to the designated location, I saw a figure standing on the sidewalk, their face obscured by the shadows. They approached the taxi and climbed into the back seat without a word, their movements stiff and deliberate. I glanced at them in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was the outline of their silhouette against the darkness. There was something about their presence that made my skin crawl, but I brushed it off as my imagination running wild. "Where to?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach. The passenger didn't respond immediately, and for a moment there was only silence in the car. Then, in a voice that sent a chill down my spine, they instructed me to take them to a remote location far outside the city limits. I hesitated for a moment, my mind racing with thoughts of all the horror stories I'd heard about taxi drivers being lured into dangerous situations by unsuspecting passengers. But I pushed aside my fears and started the engine, determined to do my job and get the fare over with as quickly as possible. As we drove deeper into the countryside, the roads grew increasingly deserted, the only light coming from the dim glow of the moon overhead. I stole glances at the passenger in the rearview mirror, but their face remained hidden in the shadows. Suddenly, without warning, the passenger spoke again, their voice low and menacing. They instructed me to pull over to the side of the road, claiming they needed to make a quick stop. My heart hammered in my chest as I complied with their request, pulling the taxi to a stop on the deserted roadside. I watched with growing apprehension as the passenger climbed out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. Minutes ticked by, but the passenger didn't return. Panic began to claw its way up my throat as I realized I was alone on a deserted road in the middle of nowhere with no idea what was happening. Just as I was about to abandon the taxi and make a run for it, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I froze, my heart pounding in my ears as I waited for whatever horror awaited me. But to my relief, it was not the passenger who emerged from the darkness, but a figure clad in a police uniform. Relief flooded through me as I rolled down the window and greeted the officer, explaining the strange situation I found myself in. The officer listened intently to my story, his expression grave as he took in the details. Without a word, he instructed me to follow him back to the station, where he promised to get to the bottom of what had happened. As we drove back to the safety of the city lights, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that lingered in the pit of my stomach. What had my passenger been planning? And what horrors awaited me on that deserted road in the dead of night? Though I may never know the answers to those questions, one thing was for certain: I would never forget the terror of that night as long as I lived. It was just another night on the job for me, responding to emergency calls as a paramedic. But little did I know, this call would lead me straight into a nightmare. The call came in around midnight, reports of a car accident in a remote area on the outskirts of town. Without hesitation, I jumped into my ambulance and raced to the scene, adrenaline pumping through my veins. As I arrived at the location, I immediately sensed that something was off. The scene was eerily quiet, with no sign of any vehicles or injured individuals in sight. But before I could radio for backup, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind. I turned around to see a group of people emerging from the darkness, their faces obscured by the shadows. My heart pounded in my chest as I realized that these were not the injured victims I had been expecting. They were criminals, and I had walked right into their trap. Before I could react, the group descended upon me, overpowering me with their sheer numbers. I struggled against them, but it was no use. They had me surrounded, and I was completely at their mercy. As they bound my hands and feet with zip ties, I knew that I was in serious trouble. My mind raced with thoughts of all the horrible things they could do to me out here in the middle of nowhere, with no one around to hear my screams for help. But I refused to give up without a fight. With every ounce of strength I had left, I fought back against my captors, landing blows wherever I could in a desperate bid to break free. Miraculously, my efforts paid off, and I managed to wriggle free from their grasp. But my victory was short-lived. As I scrambled to my feet and tried to make a run for it, one of the criminals tackled me to the ground, sending us both tumbling into the darkness. As we grappled on the ground, I could feel my strength waning, the adrenaline that had fueled me now fading away. But I refused to give up, knowing that my life depended on it. With one final burst of energy, I managed to break free from the criminal's grip and scramble to my feet. Ignoring the pain coursing through my body, I sprinted into the darkness, praying that I could outrun my pursuers and find safety. For what felt like an eternity, I ran blindly through the night, the sounds of pursuit echoing in my ears. But just when I thought I couldn't go on any longer, I saw a glimmer of light in the distance, the headlights of a passing car. With renewed hope, I pushed myself to go faster, my lungs burning and my legs aching with every step. And then, finally, I reached the safety of the road, where I collapsed in exhaustion as the car screeched to a halt beside me. The driver, a passerby who had stumbled upon the scene, wasted no time in helping me into their vehicle and driving me to safety. As we sped away from the nightmare that had unfolded in the darkness, I couldn't help but feel overwhelming gratitude for the stranger who had saved my life. Though the events of that night would haunt me for years to come, I knew that I was one of the lucky ones. I had survived. And as I looked back on the horrors I had faced, I vowed to never let my guard down again, knowing that danger could lurk around any corner. I'm a road trip enthusiast, always seeking out new adventures and hidden gems along the way. So when I heard about an abandoned highway rumored to be haunted, I knew I had to check it out for myself. As I drove along the desolate road, the atmosphere was eerie, with an unsettling stillness hanging in the air. The sky above was dark and foreboding, adding to the sense of dread that gripped me. As I continued down the highway, I began to notice strange phenomena, unexplained noises echoing in the distance, shadows moving just out of sight. My heart raced as I tried to rationalize what I was experiencing, but deep down, I knew that something was very wrong. Suddenly, my headlights flickered, casting eerie shadows across the road ahead. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized that I was now alone out here in the darkness. Just then, I caught a glimpse of something moving in the shadows, a figure lurking just beyond the edge of the road. My blood ran cold as I realized that whatever it was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease as I pressed on, determined to reach the end of the abandoned highway. But with each passing mile, the sense of dread only grew stronger, like a weight pressing down on my chest. As I rounded a bend in the road, I saw something that made my heart stop, a figure standing in the middle of the highway, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just inches from the mysterious figure. For a moment, we stared at each other in silence, the tension thick in the air. And then, without warning, the figure darted off into the darkness, disappearing from sight as quickly as it had appeared. I sat there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Was it some kind of prank, or had I truly encountered something supernatural out here on the abandoned highway? Shaken but determined to press on, I continued down the road, my nerves on edge as I kept a lookout for any further signs of danger. But as I drove deeper into the darkness, the feeling of being watched only intensified, like unseen eyes were following my every move. Suddenly, I heard a loud thud from the back of my car, followed by the sound of scratching and scraping. My heart pounding, I pulled over to investigate, my hands trembling as I reached for the door handle. As I stepped out into the darkness, I saw something that filled me with terror, a shadowy figure crouched behind my car, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. I froze in fear, unable to move as the figure slowly advanced towards me. With a surge of adrenaline, I turned and fled back to my car, scrambling to start the engine and get the hell out of there. As I peeled out onto the road, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but the figure was nowhere to be seen. I drove faster and faster, desperate to escape the nightmare that had unfolded on the abandoned highway. But no matter how far I drove, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, lurking in the darkness, waiting for its next victim. Eventually, I reached the end of the abandoned highway and breathed a sigh of relief, grateful to be alive. But as I looked back on the terrifying encounter, I knew that I would never forget the horrors I had faced out there in the darkness. Though I may never fully understand what happened that night, one thing was for certain: I would never venture down that abandoned highway again, not for all the road trips in the world. The road stretched out before me, twisting and turning like a serpent as I drove deeper into the heart of the mountains. I had set out to document my journey through the isolated mountain pass, hoping to capture the breathtaking beauty of the landscape on film. But as the sun dipped below the horizon and darkness descended upon the mountains, I began to feel a sense of unease creeping over me. The winding roads seemed to stretch on endlessly, with no signs of civilization in sight. I tried to push aside my growing apprehension as I continued to drive, but a nagging feeling of being watched lingered at the back of my mind. I glanced nervously at the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a pair of eyes staring back at me from the darkness. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I spotted a figure standing by the side of the road up ahead. My heart leaped into my throat as I slowed the car to a stop, my eyes fixed on the shadowy silhouette illuminated by my headlights. For a moment, I considered driving on and pretending I hadn't seen anything. But something about the figure, the way it stood perfectly still, as if waiting for me, compelled me to stop and investigate. With trembling hands, I rolled down the window and called out to the figure, my voice trembling with fear. There was no response, only silence, as the figure continued to stand there, unmoving, in the darkness. I felt a shiver run down my spine as I realized that something was not quite right about this situation. The figure seemed too still, too silent, as if it were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. I quickly rolled up the window and pressed down on the accelerator, determined to put as much distance between myself and the mysterious figure as possible. But as I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed, that the darkness was closing in around me with every passing mile. I tried to focus on the road ahead, to push aside the fear that threatened to consume me. But no matter how fast I drove, the feeling of being watched persisted, like a weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. And then, just when I thought things couldn't get any worse, I rounded a bend in the road and came face to face with another figure standing in the middle of the road, blocking my path. I slammed on the brakes, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the figure in horror. It was the same shadowy silhouette I had seen before, only now it was closer, its eyes gleaming with a malevolent light in the darkness. For a moment, I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of what to do next. But then, with a surge of adrenaline, I threw the car into reverse and backed away from the figure, my tires spinning in the loose gravel as I fought to escape its clutches. But no matter which way I turned, the figure was there, always lurking just out of reach, its presence a constant reminder of the danger that lurked in the darkness. I knew then that I had to get out of there, that if I didn't find a way to escape soon, it would be too late. With trembling hands, I reached for my phone and dialed 911, praying that help would come before it was too late. And then, just as I felt the darkness closing in around me, I heard the sound of approaching sirens in the distance. Relief flooded through me as I realized that help was on the way, that I would soon be safe from whatever malevolent force lurked in the shadows. I waited anxiously for the police to arrive, my eyes fixed on the road ahead as I searched for any sign of their approaching headlights. And then, finally, I saw them, a convoy of police cars racing toward me, their sirens blaring as they cut through the darkness like beacons of hope in the night. With a sigh of relief, I stepped out of the car and waved frantically at the approaching officers, my heart pounding in my chest as I recounted my harrowing ordeal. And as they led me to safety, I couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude wash over me.